Here, okay, before we get any further into anything, because this is how it always happens, we get on before we start hitting the record button and say, like, hey, did you see? We start jumping into things. So, good generic time of the internet to everyone listening. Thanks for coming back for another round. This is the Political Fun Time Happy Hour Deluxe. We will be throwing to the second half of the killer interview we did last week with one Sophie from Mars. But we can't go 2 weeks without getting the gang together. And also, there's a couple of news stories we wanted to hit on, some things we wanted to cover. It's the new year. We got to start it off right. But I think a lot of our conversation today will actually be a really, really good companion to what we talked about with Sophie, where we got there. But before we dive any further in, how's everyone doing?
Pretty okay. It's a new year. New year, same me.
See, that's a bold choice right there. New Year, same you. That is from my understanding, contrary to popular wisdom. However, look at the people who say New Year, new me, and do you want to be them?
Yeah, it's an exculpating phrase. People just don't want to take responsibility for the parts of their lives that they don't like very much, and so they invent ways to feel better about it.
Well, now that sounds pretty smart, because I if that's the option of just me going like, the number changed, I'm not responsible for anything I've ever done. I mean, hey,
new me, who this? It's incredible.
Brent, how's life in the trenches out there? In the quote-unquote justice system. Did you say bad?
I said, oh, fine.
Oh, they said bad. I was like, oh, no. What happened? What kind of plea deal did you make? You surviving it out there?
Oh, yeah.
On the rough Stanislaus streets?
Yeah. 4th week done.
It feels like it's been longer than that already. Yeah, damn.
I guess only 20 more to go. Wait, no.
I was going to say, hopefully not just 21. That's a very grim prophecy to make when there's like, oh yeah, just 5 more months.
Only
but
240 times as much to go. There you go.
Well, as always, it's it's at least despite all of the terrible things we're about to tell you about, there's one good man standing in the gap for the Central Valley, saying no. Get out of here, Mr. Policeman. That's not evidence.
Incredible.
I was going to make a joke, but I will forget to bleep it. So that's the end of that riff. Anyway.
Eat my shit and hair, Mr. Policeman.
What?
What?
What'd you say?
My shit and hair?
That shit, and hair.
Or shit in hair as just a generic, unactionable, not legally problematic wish towards people who wear blue uniforms but are not giving you mail. Or something. Lawyer man, was that oblique enough that no one could understand it and therefore get us in trouble?
I still think that Brent said the most radical stuff on this show so far. I don't know.
Oh, that was on the previous one.
There's a reason. Yeah. There's a reason you got to pay us. We theoretically would set up a Patreon if enough people said, "I will give you $1,000 a month." To unleash the old episodes, but it was too much. It's too much. It was irresponsible. The world's not ready for it.
The world's not ready for this level of absolute absurdness. Now, really, the big reason that I wanted to call us here today, we do have a quorum now. That is two of us. I think counts as a quorum.
But it's all three. It's a full fucking assembly. Let's get important here, Andy.
The big thing about these episodes is that we're looking into the historical developments that led up to our current state, and that article that you sent I think really complements it really well. And so the reason why I was pushing to get it on wasn't for any of the other like tiny little news items that have popped up since we had a chance to news. It's a new church for racists inside the Church of Arianity article. I just wanted to like really quickly like go over this and talk about it a little bit. Like we can do more in depth on another time, but because we do have the second half of the episode to get into. But I did want to talk about it at least a little bit.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. What the article we're referring to here comes from friend of pod, Left Coast Right Watch, which, if you were unaware, has their own podcast now. Is that
what it's called?
No, it's
we are rivals now.
What is it called? It's like the Absolute State. So it's like the absolute state of whatever they're talking about. Wow. I know Abner just got back from covering the Turning Points conference, I believe it was, down in Arizona, or some
I see
TP or
the article
whatever.
about that, right?
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, that article.
The Turning Point Nightmare.
People walking around in like cardboard cutouts of cell phones to promote like their right-wing dating site and try to make matches so they can make good Christian white Republican babies. It's a little on the nose, but the article we're talking about here is fantastic.
They have Dr. James Lindsay there. I just want to point out that guy's so funny. He's like supposedly some kind of counter expert on critical race theory, but his whole credentials is going on Dr. Phil and making an ass of himself.
Man, I've listened to a couple of YouTube videos of him talking about that, and his like, this is my effort to debunk the march of cultural marketing. It's just, it is insufferable for that genre, which is saying a lot. But I remember back in the day, because he was like in kind of like on the tail end of like the atheist new Reddit or Reddit new atheist shit, and I remember like, it was like an early bad take, and it was an early, I don't remember, I wish I remember the specifics, but it was like way back in the day before we were even doing the podcast on Twitter. I had like followed him because it was, I think it was like his handle was like God doesn't or something. It was just, red meat, Reddit atheist kind of shit. But there was like something he said, and it was like one of like my first interactions with somebody, like some rando on Twitter ever. And I remember it just being like, just going, at, whatever his handle was, like, seriously? That's your take? And it was like, yeah, what's the problem? And, that was his answer. And I didn't think about him again for many years until, like, he became all of a sudden relevant to, like, because he's in with the people from, like, the NXIVM sex trafficking cult shit. He's in with, like, the CRT. Like, he's right up there with, like, Chris Rufo. He's just a fucking, man. Like,
did you read this article? The picture with the lineup for it is so funny. And it's also just funny to point out that he's on like,
are
the
always
fifth
amazing.
row. There's like 50 people, and he's like at the very bottom of it.
After fucking
there's like so many people on it.
After, even for following this beat a lot,
Newt
there's like
Gingrich.
people I've never heard of, and then him. Yeah.
Dennis Prager.
What's just absolutely wild about this so far is that like every single hate movement is wrapped up in this, right? Like, mentioned on this page, Christian identity, Rhodesia, the KKK, regular Nazis,
Just
Christian
the regular
identity,
ones, nothing special.
Third mention of Christian identity. Like it's just like over and over, every single right-wing people are just completely like, they're so absorbed with with hating people, right? Like, it's the most basic lib take, but like it absorbs their life. You go onto fucking Twitter and you look at their timeline, they're not even reposting funny shit. It's just hate. It's all they fucking think about, and it absorbs them, and it ruins their lives and the lives of the fucking people around them.
Well, and that was the same kind of thing. Like down like in the middle of the body here, came across the name. It was like, oh, Matthew Heinbach. I haven't seen that in forever. That was the dude whose like dad was also like a leader in the same racist movement, and he fucked his wife or something. So like it was like family drama on top of Nazi drama. Like this was we had hit on this like in the previous iteration of the pod, and it was like, oh, of course he's fucking popping up there, because the
what's
one
that
thing
name again?
Matthew, I think it's Matthew Heinbach. Hein something. I think it's Heinbach.
I'm just trying to find his picture.
Before we gloss over it entirely, Heimbach. Before we gloss over entirely, this is the article from Left Coast Right Watch. It's a couple months old at this point, or a month and a half. A new church for racists inside the Church of Arianity. And when this popped up, Andy, you're exactly right. There's a bunch of other things we could cover. There's a lot of little tidbits, but this fits so fucking perfect with the discussion we had, like, and is so continuous and so enmeshed with everything else we've ever talked about in any kind of iteration. But this one literally, like second paragraph in, they talk about, out of Kentucky, indoctrinating young men into, quote, the order, capital T, capital O, training them to be soldiers for Rahowa, or racial, holy, ho, war, Rahowa. It is literally a martyrdom.
It's a regional
focus.
pronunciation of Helter Skelter. Watching you have a little flop attack is delightful.
I'm telling you, we got it. If we streamed, the awkward silences would make more sense because it's me having fallen out of a chair and struggling to get back into it. No, it's exactly, but unironically.
They're number one, they're hoping that they're framing it as a religion will allow them to prevent hate crime charges.
I hadn't even thought about that fucking angle. I was thinking in like the social allowance that would create, and in kind of the plausible deniability within that realm. I hadn't even thought about religious exemptions to hate crime charges, and or at least having that as a fallback argument. That's a great point.
But then I don't know how to phrase this without maybe treading around the edges of anti-Semitism, because we're talking about Nazis here, but it seems like they're kind of jealous of Jewish people.
Well, I feel like that's pretty par for the course with anti-Semites. Like, you could read a lot of that in it is resent, it is jealousy, of
specifically
of
they want an ethno-religion. They want that, yeah. Well,
and especially looking at the conflation of, especially over the last couple decades, anyone on the left that says, hey, some fucked up things happening in Israel, and it's like anti-Semitism. You're like, no, you cannot flatten criticism of the state of Israel to anti-Semitism. There's some really good back in the day. Michael Brooks had some really, really good riffs on that, and he was like on I-24, like debating with people on that, and like just shutting people down who were not accustomed to being challenged. But no, I think that's like a really insightful way to look at like the kind of the larger run, because I think in most instances of it, you can, taking their own language at face value, kind of interpret it as a jealous reaction. It's never that is bad. It's bad that they do that and we are oppressed by it, and that is why, Nazi shit. But it is always, it's not that is bad. It's bad that the bad people are doing it. It's not an actual criticism of disproportionate or asymmetrical power being exercised. It's not a criticism of shady shit and money buying speech. It is it's bad because the Jews are doing it. I don't know why they don't whisper when they say the Jews, but
here's the actual quote. Jews have been winning because they're not just a race but also a religion. By creating this church, we sought to fight fire with fire.
Can't have both. Come on.
And
that's unfair. That is unfair.
What's really interesting about this is like the Quiverful movement already exists.
Oh Jesus! Right? Oh my God! You triggered me, Andy. I had kind of forgotten about that, and Quiverful.
No, wait. I apologize for nothing.
No, I mean that literally is population based. It is a God. Be fruitful, multiply. Taken to the extreme of you can't fuck till you're married, and then that way you get married early, fuck a lot, make a bunch of babies. It is like a Catholic level of condemnation of contraception, because how dare you, presuppose that you can take the role of God in deciding whether life is created or not. It is all of that, but I had identified that way more with just more typical wacko like Liberty University Christian shit. not like oh no, it is to make white babies. But it's that. Yeah. I keep cutting you off. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, I mean, we're just kind of floating around through this article to like point out the things that are interesting. Is that like, very, very obviously the people who, if you've dug through SPLC's hate map or through their archives, if you've paid attention to this stuff, you're familiar with the symbolism, you'll be familiar with the word choices, like that quote that I read. I actually started in the middle. The quote starts with, "This is the final solution," and I skipped that part.
Yeah.
Right?
Imagine. You won't, that's not an accident. Yeah. Like that's one of those things like that. That is not constructed where you accidentally or by happenstance invoke the phrase final solution and then proceed to talk about that dynamic of the kind of politico-religious intersection of Jewish identity in a negative light.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got, so you'll see like them either being part of using the imagery of or invoking the phrasings of various movements. Like I was saying that you scroll through this article, you'll see all these different movements. The one that was new to me was the Traditionalist Workers' Party.
Really?
Because I hadn't looked into that at all, and it just sounds like rebranded Nazi, like literally. And then you look into it, and that's what it is.
Nazis specifically ported into an American 20th century, like late 20th century context, like with those kind of playing on social and economic anxieties, but otherwise very little change from it. Yeah, and because that also is one of those that like they will kind of play like they're like there's like the New York Party that's like they have like their like split ballots, like the Working Families Party. Yeah, Working Families Party, which is kind of like the left wing of the Democrats in New York. That Traditionalist Workers' Party very much will use that moniker to lie low, the same way that I was for a brief period in California. I thought I was registering as an independent, but no, there's like the American Independent Party, which is a similar, not quite as fucking far into that, and not quite as deep in, but similarly let's put an innocuous and patriotic sounding name over just Nazi shit, like just like not like euphemistically Nazi adjacent, like just Nazi shit as a plan for America, but you say things that sound unobjectionable, which is I think part of what plays into this. Like, even like the Aryanity, I don't think that most people have the identity, have this like the fucking spidey sense of if someone says Aryan, you should be very and immediately skeptical of anything else coming out of their fucking mouth. But also like all the fucking the Latin shit, like they have the Ordo Milites Templi Occidentis, or the Order of the Western Knights Templar, which again, alarm bells should be going off, but by putting things in there, it sounds like it's like the fucking, the Oddfellows Club or your local Masons or some just, kind of like local fucking history club that uses a Latin, term or whatever. But like that's a very, I think, not just deliberate, but very effective mechanism for them to kind of hide in plain sight. But the TWP, I've seen that pop up for a long time. That was like, that's come up like in a lot of my earliest like awareness of, breaking that fucking naivety of like, oh wait, America has real Nazis? Are you kidding me? Or people who wish they were realer Nazis than they currently are allowed to be, like, holy shit. But it is all in that, and it does, without engaging in fucking stereotypes or whatever, like it does center in that Southern milieu where there's like a lost cause myth to appeal to a glorious past that was robbed of you, where you could say stabbed in the back.
And the Sacramento Spartans bring in the chair, Ty, to your argument. I mean, their Golden Skate Skinheads, Asatru Folk Assembly, the Sacramento Spartans, these groups are not this is nationwide, right?
Absolutely. I was only saying that I became familiar with it from, I feel like the TWP is more in that like kind of like the northern belt of the South, like that like Bible Belt, but not Southern Baptist Conference kind of territory.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree. But even then, it's the same thing of I mean, and it's kind of true of the Proud Boys in the same way of just like, here's a stupid name. Surely we can't be sinister. And then they're like breaking your teeth out on the fucking curb, and it's like, but you had a silly name.
Yeah, and you go through, you look at these, like there are, oh my god, I literally can't even identify all of the symbolisms, right? I just found a new one that I'd never seen before, which is the Rise Above movement. Somebody's wearing a Free Our Political Prisoners Rise Above movement shirt, and I had to look that one up because that's a new one to me, right? So like this is like very like. And this is one of the things, like, if you look at good journalism that tracks these movements, right?
Oh, right, RAM, Rise Above, the RAM. That's like it's like Fight Club.
Oh, when you said RAM, that like ticked in my head. Like I'd heard of RAM before, but I hadn't.
No, but that's out of SoCal. Yeah. And it's like it's literally a Fight Club where like what's the oh Jesus Christ, Patriot Front. They go do their like homoerotic rolling around in the woods to prove how masculine and hetero they are. But like RAM is legit like bare knuckle boxing club, so you learn how to hit people and do damage, and then show up and to hit people and do fucking damage. As of 2017, the SPLC has a quote from a RAM member said in Berkeley in April 2017, and it was literally, quote, "Death to Antifa."
That's
how can we parse this? How can we know what they mean?
It seems like they're pretty against whatever Antifa stands for.
So they're against fascism. From my understanding of the situation.
Well, because Antifa's the real ones. Winston Churchill said
so they're the real Antifa. It all makes sense.
Yeah, but and I cannot stress this enough how much they do not cut the figure. Like when they're standing out there, when they're marching, when whatever, they're not selling the aesthetics. I'm sorry to say it. They're not doing it.
You're saying you don't look at them Boss, and say that is what we should genetically aspire for our children to be?
I am saying that, sure.
Also, you shouldn't aspire for your children to be genetically anything, obviously, but it's if you were to think of that even then they wouldn't really ring that bell?
I think that they think that they're the specimens, and they think that they.
Oh, I know they think that. No, I agree. Yeah, no, they think that.
And so when they say they're protecting a future for white children, they're thinking of very red, very wet, dumpy-looking white guys in long-sleeve T-shirts.
Hey, don't you impugn the dignity of long-sleeve tees? I resemble that remark.
I'm saying that if this is the best the Nazis have to offer, that Hugo Boss is rolling in his grave.
Queer eye for the Nazi?
Well, I mean, they during the uniform production phase, they did have queers. So
yeah, when it was important, and then it was all downhill from there. Man, I meant that as a joke, but obviously, also not. Shit. It's a tough subject to do comedy on, folks.
It is. It
real
is
hard
really
to pull the
fucking
laughs
hard.
out of.
All right. I think that we've gotten through it. There's definitely a lot more to deep dive into here.
Well, and we're supposed to have Abner
got
on.
20 minutes.
Well,
yes.
Yeah, well, I let him know I want to dive into this. I do want to hear from him more just the general, what's been going on with LCRW. I think this article on leftcoastrightwatch.org, go read it, go donate, go support them. It
has so much information. I cannot stress enough that.
And there's there's 3 cross links in
else,
every paragraph. This has information and it has links to so much more.
Yes.
I do want to tag. I know we have a long remainder of the interview to get to, and I hope everyone, it is so worth the time to listen all the way through. That's kind of why we split it up, is we wanted to make sure that the back half didn't get lost in there. But along these lines, and very much seating in it, and I think just to kind of bring the abstract threat of this ideological current kind of to a more pragmatic and when how what's really going on since, I wanted to revisit something that we've talked about in a couple episodes ago when we were covering those North Carolina power grid attacks, and these are I would hope obviously, but at the very least very definitely related in that there's a few articles. Unicorn Riot actually has a pretty good one that specifically dives into the right-wing reaction, and even where there are, because in addition to the ones we talked about in North Carolina, there was some in Florida. There's one in at least one in Oregon. It was in I believe near Seattle, it was somewhere in Washington, that on Christmas Eve 14,000 people lost power because of an attack on a substation, and the Unicorn Riot article particularly talks about how the online right has reacted to it, and how much, even while obviously I think our suspicions lean towards, well, what kind of people would do this? Who doesn't care if old people freeze and die in the winter because they don't have a fucking heater? Probably not fucking Antifa. But even while that is you maybe beyond provable, or there's been the kind of one of the through lines of all these stories is police have made no apprehensions and have no leading suspects in relation to these attacks on the infrastructure, yada yada yada. The response,
which means that the cops were involved.
Well, obviously that seems the most likely. or that there's at least some degree of a lack of a real vim and vigor in pursuing the perpetrators. But even if it wasn't the case, even if it wasn't explicitly done by right wingers for this cause, the reaction and the signing on to the accelerationist kind of narrative behind that, and in breaking that down, it is all that the siege mentality. It is all the is gets very Turner Diaries very, very quick. It very quickly goes into people who, even if there is no one to praise for carrying it out on that side, they're still quick to jump to, hey, one day closer to, what do they call that? Rahowa, Helter Skelter. It is just the chaos and the acceleration and the breakdown of society as it exists currently in order to create the room to push their own ideal, and through violence with less chance of state structures or organized social responses. That is what all the Telegram channels, all the Discord chats, everything that anyone has been able to leak out of any kind of right-wing sphere of discussion has been immediately and pretty much unequivocally praising of that, if not in saying, hey, our boy did this, hell yeah, that was good, in saying that someone did this, let's fucking take advantage of the chaos. And, I just wanted to make sure we tagged that on to say that, from our last talk, these attacks have continued. That when you add in this Arianity kind of belief and everything, we're going to kind of continue talking on with Sophie here in a bit, it's not hard to imagine, and at the very least, the rhetoric points so directly towards those kind of things that when they happen, I think the plausible deniability of folks who want to claim oh no, we're just good religious American Christians, yet participate in the broader culture that either minimizes or at least doesn't deal with these more extreme, be it Reconstructionist, post-millenarian, or just overtly racist, right wing with a. I mean, it's stupid to think that that American fascism, over half a century later, is going to appear in the same way that European fascism did in the middle of the 20th century. And so when you see these things, there's enough direct one-to-ones that it say, well, we shouldn't even get this clear of a fucking indication. But since we are, you see these groups popping up, you see this rhetoric, and you see that married to what I think is really concerning about that Arianity is it is exactly as apocalyptic. It is exactly as glorifying of both the idea that you should kill and die for these beliefs. Yet there is not even the pretense of a idealized Christian morality or of a anything other than the exercise of power under the guise of religion in the name of whiteness and its supremacy. You can't flower that up at all. It is just
the thing that they're worshiping is whiteness, right? You don't hear them talking about Christ.
They were worshiping that just in lieu of talking about Christ and a lot of things that we were talking about. But seeing this Arianity and seeing that trend, it is they're not even doing the song and dance pretend that they're not just doing that they're not just worshiping whiteness. They are saying we are cynically, overtly, and nakedly leveraging the privileges allotted to religious belief because of that Christian primacy that we were talking about in the interview, but removing that for all intents and purposes apart from the shield that it allows them, and then just going with all the hate and dressing it up in the symbolism of the other. That gets real fucking scary. Gets real fucking scary.
It feels like this is such a weird thing that I don't think that we've ever done before. It feels like I don't know where to call it and be like, hey, let's and now for the show. Right?
I mean,
you should explain. We're recording this post-interview.
Yeah.
To add.
Well, we released the first half last week, so I think that part's pretty clear, based on the linear flow of time.
Hopefully. Yeah,
listener, if you were so high that you think we recorded this.
I thought my understanding was you're putting this onto the second half of the interview, but before it.
Yeah.
Yeah, when two of the hosts, the midpoint it cuts off, on with the show is probably a perfect time. We can stop recording.
On with the show! So real quick, just to cut back to what Sophie was getting at as far as like the Alex Jones and that kind of rhetoric there. I think one of the important things is, like Andy said, it is easier and to a lot of people more desirable to die for your faith because it is a singular vindication of all of the shit. You have to defend none of it. You have to justify none of it. You get to be vindicated and right in a way that is from early church times and wasn't early. I mean, an early split in like the 1st and 2nd century Christian church before like Irenaeus and before Constantine and before many of the councils and before even the New Testament or even the 4 synoptic gospels were agreed on. There was a controversy about, is it good to be murdered? Like, should you go and just shout to your nearest fucking, local overlord, I'm a Christian, come and get me, because as Paul says, to live is Christ and to die is gain. But when that is the underlying bit that even even for people who haven't really delved into that theology, who haven't considered all of those things, when you have this underlying notion that I think fits very well with this American-ass cowboy, I'm the singular savior and I come in and died, I went down, but I took the bad ones with me. All of that shit, I think, sets that up very well where it obviously still is a conversation about mental health and access to healthcare and access to, it is a conversation about alienation and a breaking, a lack of social resources and all of the above. But when you add that element in there, it takes it makes it so much easier for a single individual, likely who is unwell, but able to reconcile and to manage some of this with this grandiose notion of divine mission when you're being told that X, Y, and Z is the largest threat to our nation, our children, or whatever. You go in there, and so many of the gaps that could have prevented that you could not have morally brought yourself to cross, when you have a divine mission, when you are acting on behalf of the unquestionable Almighty God, you are reading what you understand from His inarguably perfect word. A lot of the obstacles and a lot of what would usually prevent that, a lot of the humanity that would usually engage, you're able not only to pass over, but to glorify the doing of that. You are able to preemptively see this position of glory as a martyr. And frankly, once you have psychologically, I think, identified with that, every step to that point is just flattened so fucking far. And at the same time, back to the, the 90s, or the early aughts, like my memory is, very, that was the rhetoric. And it's true today to a even more turned up degree, but the idea of many Christians that I think is 100% not in their mind, but actually motivated by their eschatology is that we're living in the final days. Jesus could come back at any point. And on one hand, there's the anxiety of but what if I'm masturbating when He does and I don't get to heaven? Oh my God. If I died in His name now, I could avoid this entire dilemma. And then also the belief of persecution by fucking white Christians, as wildly inaccurate as it obviously is not ungenuine. It is not disingenuous. They have bought the bullshit so far. And there's another bit I want to get to as far as how that overlaps with specific white nationalism and those ideologies down here in a bit. But does that make sense based on the question you asked?
That makes sense, and that's all. I could definitely see why, how a religious motivator drives martyrdom. But I guess what I'm saying about my British perspective, I just don't know. If I
you don't have cowboys there, we get it. It's much less stupid on that one point alone.
It's the reverse. Martyrdom's also the reverse Pascal's wager, right? Because they think of themselves as persecuted because their lives aren't that great, and they've been taught to look for signs of persecution that just aren't where the sources are,
but
right?
No,
and then
we need to back up here because like and yes, it's true. Like instead of the cowboy, we have the lovable public nonce. It's like our culture is very different, but like I just
Jesus.
I don't. What I mean is like I don't know if I am correct in thinking that the people who do mass shootings are primarily or even all like engaging with the Christian martyrdom narrative.
Yes, that's why I was trying to make the point that there's all these different narratives within each individual narrative, and I was trying to reach over to the within the larger stochastic system, each individual Christian dominionism, Reconstructionism, whatever, those are the Christian right-wing ideologies, whichever ones are there,
right.
And they have overlaps with each other in certain political areas and certain rhetorical areas,
right.
but not necessarily all of them, and theological areas too. But then, the school shooter rhetoric, the doesn't completely overlap with church shooter or whatever. All of their ideologies are slightly different, but the thing that causes them to make the choice about what to shoot, the sources where they get
I think I'm getting it,
those choices,
Well, and to go one step further, the source of the ability to take that action, it doesn't require that you are a devout Christian and actually justifying it in a theological sense or actually do yourself as a martyr. That shit is just in the water here. Like that kind of Christian ideology and that kind of individualism is so pervasive that you don't have to necessarily sign on to the spiritual or theological elements to have the access to the glorification of martyrdom, the stalwart individual standing against degeneracy, all of those things. There's 94 different levels that they all kind of, like cross-pollinate at.
Right. I want to make sure I'm getting this right.
I know that we're getting it right. That's just
that's like Britain is one of the most godless nations on earth, and you only have to like look at a picture of Piers Morgan to know that. But we have like
I wasn't an atheist until I saw that. Then I thought no loving God could make this man.
The counter argument is Richard Kind, who doesn't seem to have aged at all in like 40 years, but he looks like Richard Kind, and I think that demonstrates that not only is God real, but he has a sense of humor. I think like what I'm saying is because I live in a culture that is nominally, at least, very, very atheist, it's a very strange idea to me of Christian ideology being so widespread as to touch everyone enough for all the mass shooters being driven like that. But what you're giving me back is whether explicitly Christian or not and driven by Christian identity or overlapping Christian and white nationalist ideologies, the right-wing nature of mass shooters is pretty undeniable, and like it's a general right-wing climate that drives someone to shoot people because trans people are ruining everything, or feminism is ruining everything, or immigrants are ruining everything, or people not believing in Jesus is ruining everything, and it's all the same like structure of belief, whether or not
you can categorize those separately, but they are basically of the same fabric.
It's the same narrative, it's the same emotional story.
It's the same narrative woven over a social, over a demographic, over a religious, over a spiritual.
Argue that the categorical error that leftist stochastic terrorists have made in the past, back when leftist stochastic terrorism was still a thing, is that they are conflating people, like the individuals who might be caught up with it, with whatever the larger ideological target they have. Like, so the Weather Underground one of their last bombings was that they tried to send a bomb to an enlisted club, right? But an enlisted club is just one of the benefits that people who didn't have a choice about joining the military at that time were able to take, but they didn't have a choice. They were legally obligated to join. If they had sent it to maybe an officer club, maybe a fucking country club, that would make sense, but sending it to an enlisted club doesn't, right? And so you get... Yeah. Go ahead. I was just agreeing with you. Yeah.
Well, I think that this leads really well into the next topic, basically getting into how pervasive that is and how much it is, unavoidably so, and how much I have potentially to an unfair degree, sympathy towards a lot of Christians, even that have been caught up in these ideals. And I think that is a really good terminology I'm not sure which of you introduced that, but like the idea of being caught up within these larger structures of thought, because there are a lot of people who, merely because they were brought up believing in the Christian God, the avenue of understanding of that they had accessible to them, not quite their material conditions, but literally just the options of understanding that were available to them, and how much of this ideology has been pre-captured over the course of the last couple 100 years of American history and theological development, particularly, but I mean more globally as well. There was this. I can't remember where he's out of. I think he's University of Oklahoma. Sam Perry. I was listening to a couple talks by him on Christian nationalism, and I couldn't find. I think the talk he was giving, he had aggregated multiple sources. I couldn't find. I was trying to find it before we got on today, but he was going through these surveys where they took people. They took white Christians and black Christians. They sorted them based on listing typically Christian nationalist ideas. How many of these do you believe? And then expose them to various other questions about politics. And it is the degree to which believing in more Christian nationalist shit means that you believe white people are under attack in America.
Yeah,
that the traditional family is under attack in America.
Right.
Not shockingly, but still like horrifyingly, that cops are just doing their job, and despite the attack they're under, they treat blacks and whites equally. And then, a separate question, but following to that, the reason that cops shoot more black people is because black people are inherently more fucking violent. Like, you go up the scale of atrocious white identity so fucking fast, and what leaves me aghast and like it's hard to wrestle with, because it's like, I do know good people who believe these things. I do know good people who, more than anything, I see the ugly shit they believe as a like, God damn it, you didn't have a chance not to love Ronald Reagan. Let me tell you about Ronald. It's like it's totally just the inertia of the larger movement.
Well, speaking of like category error, I think that like we often get we have a trouble with like the idea of a good person, because we know someone and we know that their heart is in the right place, or whatever other like way you'd like to describe it. But I don't think it's that like good kind of exists in the world in that way. Like I don't think that ontological evil and ontological good do so much exist, and furthermore, like I think that then we get down into questions about like human nature, right? And like what drives these kinds of behaviors. But I don't believe in fundamental human nature. I believe in fundamental human tendency, that when people have like the ceiling people are able to aspire to is what informs their behaviors. And so again, when you're talking about like a good person, but they believe in unfortunate propaganda that they've been fed, it's like that ideological box that they're in creates the firmament for them, and that shapes what their actions can be. Like people in prisons, for instance, like might exhibit like a different like set of behaviors that are informed by being in a prison. It's like, what can you do because you're in prison? Your literal freedoms are curtailed, so how you behave on a day-to-day basis, and by consequence like how you behave towards other people, will be affected. And I think very similarly, like if you like deeply believe some fucking shit you've been taught about how Christians are under attack, then it's like your nature, as it were, let's just say your personality, right? Your psychology, the tendencies that you would have as a person could be good, but your ceiling is so low. Like you're living as a person who's otherwise good, but you're just like pressed in like this. And that's what I always come back to, is like fundamental human tendency. It's a bit of a Star Trek belief of mine, but it's just like, if we all had, if the ceiling was raised off of all of us, I think we would all behave quite similarly, and quite well, to be honest.
100%.
But it's imaginative as well as material.
That's such a good point to disentangle, because I was speaking very imprecisely, and I think maybe a more accurate way for the especially the narrower band of quote unquote exception, is people who are Christian, and because to them
that is the way they best understand to articulate a belief that you should be good to other people, that there is a communal goodness that is shared, all these things that are actually in pretty stark contradiction to what Christianity in modern America has been made to be, or at least what the most vocal expressions are. And yet, you know, you brought this up earlier, like, we can't just do the Reddit atheism, like, you believe in God? Look at how superior I am. Not only because we see what kind of people come out of doing that, and I'm sure none of us want to be anything approaching that. But like, I mean, my early breaking away from the church, like I was very much deep in that. And I think, you know, to some degree, some of my like leftism came from having no exposure to alternatives, and then seeing that as an alternative, and then seeing what that led to, and how it was you're making the Christians I know look awful tolerant. Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah, I definitely had a phase of like being really into reading Richard Dawkins and arguing for hours and hours with creationists, because how could you be so stupid as to believe everything that the Bible says or whatever? And now it's like, well, Richard Dawkins advocates for eugenics, so
yeah.
Like,
and apart from even being able to, you know, take or not take any portion of his thought or whatever, there is this like, is it I'm trying to lay epic own, or is it hey, I think this person, based on the values that they are articulating, has a misunderstanding and is working with the tools they have to basically destroy what they say they are trying to build. And on one hand, I resent religion, and particularly Christianity, far more because I see what its modern manifestation does to people who I know in some capacity that leads me to believe that their impulse or their core personality or the core expressions of those human tendencies are more communal, or more, you know, benevolent, or more understanding, or more accepting, or more tolerant, all of these things. Yet then you lay the overlap of quote unquote evangelical Christianity and the marriage of that to the most odious of right-wing extremism over the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. You have interesting kind of parallels in all those, but for at least the last half a fucking century, those things being married. What do you all think is the potential for the people who are not part of this right-wing religiosity, whose belief in God in greater, whether that be a Judeo-Christian or a belief in an Abrahamic faith, or in any sort of not even theological, but deistic or just metaphysical belief in some form of what we understand in the broad strokes of organized religion? Like, what do you all understand, and what do you think is the potential for making sure we don't alienate everyone entirely?
Well, I mean, I think it's like this, right? Fucking a lot of the times when you're talking to a normal person who they're just a decent person in their day-to-day life, and almost all of their intolerance seem to stem from, well, the Bible says it's wrong, well, the preacher told me it was wrong, whatever, you know, the thing that we're going to be trying to do is to speak to them in the language they understand, right? Like, the original sin that you know, the debt that you owe to God, your original sin is that now that you have the ability to understand right from wrong, you don't rely just on the Bible. You rely on the debt that you owe to God to tell right from wrong, to do it yourself. It doesn't matter if you don't see anything wrong with it and the preacher tells you it's wrong, you don't get persuaded just because he said God says it's wrong. It's your decision. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just sinning further.
Is the fundamental nature of the myth of the Garden of Eden, but is not how Christians teach it. And that's, I mean, so again, like to briefly go over what we have in our notes for the project we're working on at the moment, which has the working title Apocalypse Preachers, but it might change by the time that it's out because it's a big project, and at any moment, Andy or I could be struck by divine inspiration and say this would be a catchier title, and we'll change it. But
also, I imagine if God comes down and gives you a title, you have to revise at least a couple of points along the way.
No, because the way that the Christians teach teach the that's pretty good. The way that Christians teach the story of Noah is wrong, right? And this is kind of crucial to what we're just talking about here, right? The story of Noah, as taught by a Christian, is about how you should do what God says, and contains actually very little meaning. And it's like God comes to Noah and says the world is fucked, and in 60 days or whatever, I'm just gonna fuck it up. And Noah is like, neat, I'll build a big boat. And that's the whole story, which is like not that interesting a story and doesn't really tell you very much except obey God.
Yet I know that if I want to build my own personal Titanic, I need to use gopher wood. Your move, atheist.
And so, but to understand the story of Noah better, you need the Jewish story of Rabbi Eliezer, right? Rabbi Eliezer was arguing with the other rabbis about the use of these ovens in relation to scripture and in relation to the law, and he had a different opinion to all the other rabbis, and the other rabbis would like, get fucked, Eliezer, you're wrong. And so he was like, if I am right, let this tree show it. And the tree plucked out of the ground and flew through the air. And the other rabbis, in an absolutely Chad move, said, that's a tree, and trees don't know anything about the law. And so Rabbi Eliezer said, well, if I'm right, let the walls of the temple show it. And so the walls of the temple started like falling down around them, and the other rabbis were like, walls, you are walls, you don't know anything about the law. And so the walls, unable to disobey Rabbi Eliezer or the other rabbis, stopped halfway. And so Rabbi Eliezer, frustrated at this point, said, if I am right, let heaven itself show it. And the heavens opened and a girl's voice rang out and said, Rabbi Eliezer is correct in all matters of the law. And the other rabbis said, well, with respect, dickhead, you gave us free will so we could decide for ourselves what is right and wrong and decide amongst ourselves what the law is. And then God's voice rang out and said, my children have surpassed me. And that's the point. That's the whole point of having free will. And so when God came to Noah...
And American Christians are entirely unequipped to deal with any of those concepts right there. Dear God, you want to wipe the population in half, the head's exploding from trying to wrestle with that. Would and just so, be like oh my God.
And so the story of Noah, when you understand the story of Rabbi Eliezer, almost plays like one of those old like Welsh Brittonic myths that like is really just a long joke where they tell you a bunch of shit just to wind you up. Like they keep the story going just to demonstrate how stupid it is and frivolous it is. And so it's like God came to Noah and was like, the world is a bad place and full of sin. And Noah said, okay. And God was like, I'm going to kill everyone. And Noah was like, okay. And then God was like, I'm going to flood it. Flood the entire world. So Noah
I'm really gonna do
got all this gopher wood and built a big boat and got all his family and got 2 of every species of animal on the earth and got them onto the boat. And then he got all the supplies and he put them on the boat.
Things.
And then he survived at sea for however long. And then he crashed into Mount Ararat. And then he repopulated the entire earth, rather than just trying to make the world a better place so God wouldn't kill everyone, right? And then that's like the basic, that we're telling that story at the start of our essay because we want to like make the point that all of these cults are ultimately using another reality that they live in to avoid having to do the work of trying to make the world a better place. All the shit that they do so much shit, sometimes impossible things, right? Because they want to avoid putting in the work to try to improve the world.
There's 2 things. Which is scarier? Thinking that God is going to destroy the whole world because it's so nasty and wicked, you just need your little boat to make it through. Or thinking that the world is so nasty and wicked that to avoid God's damnation, we must inflict his law on all of you no matter what. And then secondly, the other element of that is that, like, I think the tendency towards the apocalypticism is that fundamental belief, and I don't think you're wrong, in the disparities of the teaching of the myth of the Garden of Eden, and what is articulated there, what is promised there, what the quote the specified downsides of eating of the knowledge of good and evil, which would lead to God's children surpassing him, in that rabbinical teaching that you're talking about. But I think that fundamental to how, particularly, really anything even broadly Christian over the last 1900 years, really apart from that first, it relies so heavily on the idea that creation was created by a perfect God, but is now irrevocably fallen. And the only thing that can rectify this in this entire cosmology is its apocalypse, this rebirth through the destruction of and the new raising of God's kingdom. What?
A palingenesis, you might say.
You might say. You might say if you're more creative than Christians and better read.
It's very bizarre because it's like, again, and I mean we've been just going around with a very frustrating point over and over again that like if they understood the Bible they wouldn't do this, but like, you know, every single person who studied theology, and therefore every priest, every licensed priest, is familiar with the concept of theodicy, that if God is perfect, if God is all-loving, then he can't be all-powerful, and if he's all-powerful, he can't be all-loving, and how that bind needs you to resolve some things about the nature of God and the nature of the universe.
They just actively refuse to acknowledge it. Like, that's not unknown. It is just that everyone goes, that seems hard. Anyway, you should be a white straight guy.
But that's what I mean about like fascists living in a willful other reality, where it's like, these are your beliefs, they contradict, so we need to get to a next step, and then we'll understand the nature of God better, and we'll appreciate God more. I understand again what every licensed every licensed priest like has to, and instead they're just like you say, just like no, that would no.
So the problem with American Christians is that they're just like no. I mean, that's what we come down to. Is like they're just like no. Like, hey, here's a logical response, or what your logic seems to imply, or here is a more faithful reading of what you claim is the divine and inerrant word of God, and they go, no, I don't like gay people so much.
I have two things, right? One is in the early discussions of this project, and very like early on in our notes, Andy and I were saying like when you look at, because we're talking about Christian identity movement today, but with our project we'll talk about a few different things, and like Christian apocalypse cults is one of them. But what unites people who are kind of anti-woke today is it's so on the nose, because it's like the uniting belief of reactionaries today is against wokeness. And they all exist in an alternate reality where they refuse to believe very obvious things that you can point out to them, and they'll just say no and move on. And it's like, well, you truly are anti-woke because you are willfully
what if we just said no to anything we didn't like? We would be missing this the entire time.
Well, then we would be fascists.
Going, nope, I don't like that.
That just worked really well with my dad, actually. Saying just no, you're wrong. You're wrong, and this does not merit future discussion.
But the second thing was, and this was going to happen sooner or later, was me talking about an episode of Star Trek DS9. So there's an episode of Star Trek DS9 where Benjamin Sisko and Sirius antagonist Gul Dukat get stuck on a planet together with seemingly no hopes of rescue, and while they are stuck there, the tensions reach an inevitable point where they're going to have to like debate their beliefs. And you've seen TNG, you know what happens when a captain debates for like philosophical and moral beliefs with someone. You know that you've watched hours of Jean-Luc Picard, even though he knows he is morally superior and knows the conclusion he wants to lead people to, pretending to be on equal footing so that they can fall into ideological traps, and then he can correct them, and ultimately they wind up at the point that he wants them to get to, and he will have won. Right? We've seen Measure of a Man. We know what's going on here. And then Sisko and Dukat start debating, and Sisko's method is not like that at all, because Dukat is a fascist, so obviously he's like politically illiterate. And so like in order to bring him through the debate, Sisko has to like handhold him like a child and just goes like, you believe this thing, true or false? And like Dukat's like, true. You believe this thing, true or false? True. You believe this thing, true or false? They are irreconcilable, true or false, like that. Like that's the debate instead, because he's just like, he's so pissed, and he just can't stand this fascist motherfucker anymore. And the conclusion of the episode is that he walks Dukat through all of his beliefs, and Dukat, who before believed that although he had been the leader of the Cardassian occupation of Bajor, that he had been a benevolent ruler and that he cares for the Bajoran people. So even though he was there, he was a horrifying fucking Nazi prison camp like administrator, like, well, he gave them mattresses that they didn't have before, and he would like help some people to not get executed.
The British condition.
Like, what a loving guy, right? And so he and so when Sisko walks him through all of his beliefs and shows him that the logical endpoint of all of his beliefs is the genocide of the Bajorans, when Dukat figures out he can escape, he decides to leave Sisko behind and swears that he will kill all Bajorans on his way out. He's like, "You're right. I am evil, I am a fascist, and I will kill all Bajorans." And then, furthermore than just like the ideological conclusion of like trying to debate a fascist, when Sisko then gets rescued and he's having his wounds patched up in the med bay at the end of the episode, they're asking him what happened and he tells them about it, and he's just like, "So next time it's him or me, I'm gonna take that motherfucker out. That's the only way this can go down." And it's like, yeah, that's it.
the absolute wildness that this is, Ty.
Ty keeps pointing at me very closely in the camera.
Yes, that what you're saying, very good.
That's you can just clap and nod like a seal instead. It's okay.
Going back to the running gag. Now, podcast listener, what's been happening is there's a webcam and I'm putting my finger in it and nodding emphatically and going, But no, so take exactly that. But then you add in the apocalypticism. You add in this notion that the destruction of all, and this goes back to, we're going to have, we have literally introduced 19 of our next episodes in this one talk, because everything from the kind of the philo-Semitic roots, as Andy mentioned, I think in our, in passing in our last discussion, of what is now very anti-Semitic, and how much you must like put quotes around the philo-Semitic part on the first bit, because it was really a hatred of actual Jewish people and a like replacement of them with the British, which was a precursor to what became in America the American, the white. One thing we have to bring in before we get to the end, and it builds on that, and it shows, I think, if it doesn't give us an answer and how to deal with it, it at least I think explicates how much that is what we're dealing with. That so much of what, as I was getting at earlier, can be but I know this person, and they don't want the bad thing. They want the good thing. They fell into the bad thing, and now their good thing is limited by the bad ceiling, and all of the above. And in some ways, that's fucking tragic, and it hurts to see that, because you see for me especially, it is there's definitely a world in which, I never broke out of it, and I had to fucking come to some very, very sad balancing of, here are these atrocious things, and I can't, endorse this, but here's what I have been told that the God of the universe, infallibly and unquestionably, and with no room for any mistranslation, said, and everything must be subordinate to that. This guy, Samuel Perry, highly recommend it. If you Google him, he has a couple good talks, and the one that's most likely to come up is the one where he shows the graphs of all these. And I think that the kind of roots become evident here, but also highlight the unique degree to which we're living with this. And I'm obviously speaking, sloppily. I'm referring to we as Americans. Although obviously you're not immune from the effects of it. You just, your crazies aren't part of this particular problem and this particular kind of theological expression. But I
can say with a good measure of British shame, we gave you everything you have.
Oh no! To be clear, I was not letting you off the hook for that part. Fuck you entirely for all of that. There's no excuse, goddammit.
There is no excuse for Britain.
But for all
Britain
of
and its
various
consequences, etc.
The world story. And not a fucking fairy tale either. But no. So many of the roots go back to there. There have been so many different peaks and valleys, and I think Andy's articulation of the Puritans, the Great Awakenings, the shift to these kind of cults of if not personality, of authority within these different denominations and all the above. What Sam Perry, and I think it's Andrew Whitehead, I think was his co-author on when they were actually doing the kind of cross-examining of these ideas with racial difference. One of the interesting things was, the most revealing thing that almost, the rest was very fascinating, but once you hear this part, you go like, oh shit, that's the fucking story. All of those questions where if you are on a scale of 1 to 15, if you're a 5 Christian nationalist, you are about a 5 white nationalist.
Yeah.
Your idea of American as synonymous with Christian, as synonymous with white, is at about a 5 on 15 on the correlation scale, and pretty goddamn near a perfect fucking 1-to-1 curve. With white Christians, the more of that evangelical belief that they hold, the more they adhere to white nationalist ideas that they likely would not say on their own. They are likely unaware that the net consequence of their belief is X. They understand it as X minus 1. But you add fucking 1 to that, and that is what comes out of the fucking machine. The same poll with the same criteria of number of Christian nationalist beliefs held applied to Black Americans had almost no correlation.
Right.
If you held 3 Christian nationalist beliefs and you held 12, you were equally likely to be a 1 on the white nationalist scale. Right. And I think to kind of go back to the point about the quote unquote good people who believe whatever, like the power of it is shown in the fact that beyond the normal population, Black Christians in America, the degree that they hold any Christian nationalist beliefs will make them more likely than the baseline population to agree with very fucking crazy things about how white people are so under attack and the cops kill Black people because Black people deserve to get killed by fucking cops. Like, these are not light statements. These are not just a little bit, out of bounds.
They're horrifying.
There are things that are beyond the pale that on a just 1-to-1 bit. And those ideas of Christian nationalism are so pervasive in churches across America that you fucking gave us.
You're so welcome.
Never miss a chance to blame the British. We got enough blame. We can't deal with it. We can throw a little bit your way for something, whatever. But like, that's the part where that really makes me look at it and go like, fuck, man, there really is no response apart from disentangling the justification for white nationalism. Yet, as you importantly point out, you can't argue with fascists. It's the old Sartre thing. Like, you're a fool to argue with anti-Semites because they're not arguing with you. They're laughing at you. Yeah. It is funny that you were engaging. That's part of the troll. The whole fucking, 19 whatever the fucking Sartre was writing in. What trolling was back then was anti-Semites getting people who say, that seems fucking awful, and they're going, they're talking to us. They fucking think we're gonna listen. And it's a fucking mockery of it. We got to pull together a bit, and before we completely wrap up, I want to have you all pitch a little bit more about your project, let people know kind of like what to look out for, where to find it, what's happening between here and there. I'm already like, I was excited about that, but now I'm more like, yay, and the fascists who love him. Like, I'm a little like, well, shit, like, come out already. I'm going to pass to you about not even the thing you were on to talk about. But closing thoughts. What do you all think as far as, let's get a little bit pragmatic. Let's get a little bit international. Let's get a little bit just global in our thinking here. What is true of where you are versus where we are? What is true globally? And I think globally, especially the question of being able to engage with religious people and not fall prey to what is, you raised it early and it's so goddamn true, especially in the online space. There seems to be a taboo on religion, and that cannot be the case. The question is how we navigate the alternative. So what are closing thoughts and what we actually take away from this?
Well, I think that, like, first and foremost, as I think we've probably illustrated in our discussion, 3 of us all firmly believe that you can't really convert someone out of this. It's not really like they're either they're going to come to it or they're not. And I think that so much emphasis, and this is another critique of the online left, is like so much emphasis gets put on entryism wouldn't be the right word, but trying to get people out of the far right, and that's ultimately been a liberal response to the rise of the far right, as opposed to a will to create any kind of class consciousness. And I think that ultimately we have to see that the right and the left are not parts of one like cohesive political system with these 2 wings. There's only the only degree to which that's true is the 2 wings of the business party. And if we're actually anti-capitalists, actually trying to create an anti-capitalist politics, and even if you still call that the left, we have to see it as just a completely separate project that's just that needs to build its own strength and its own momentum towards improving people's lives and also protecting people from the far right. We can't, and this, I mean, I'm repeating some of my conclusions that I will say in Ye West and the Fascists Who Love Him Now, but it's just like, it's just no longer, the beliefs are too dire and too extreme, and their other reality is too rigidly reinforced with such hard, like, iron borders that that spending our time on deconverting people is really just like treading water, and what we should be doing is working together to create like a cohesive anti-capitalist and post-capitalist project that's going to give space for change. Do
you think we get like doubly effective results by doing what you're saying that would simultaneously and necessarily frustrate the expression of power from those people who are more difficult to deconvert individually?
100%.
But if you do the A, not only does that deconversion become more accessible and more just you can genuinely engage with it because they don't have this, but here's my advantage is being promised and the only place I see anything for me to tread water in, but also just that the appeal broadly, if it's not pointing to a likely exercise of disproportionate power,
I mean,
it just kind of takes the air out of the room anyway.
I mean, like, it's like this. With regardless of what the praxis is, do what you can, do what you should, and do what you must. Right?
Yes. Absolutely. 100%. But I think that in terms of reinforcing, like, so in terms of it's just treading water to try to deconvert people who live in this alternate reality, but in terms of reinforcing our capacity to do that by doing something better and more worthwhile instead, yes, across several fronts. So firstly, people will just have their material needs, right? And if their neighborhood floods and they believe in all sorts of like Christian nationalist, white nationalist myths and bullshit, but then a leftist mutual aid org is the one who are like housing people, rescuing people from their flooded homes, getting them food and whatever, like they'll just be like, well, those guys are doing a good thing that I can see in front of me, and that's actually literally more likely to deconvert them than anything else. Secondly, we talked earlier about like the feedback loop of stochastic terror, and if one of the things, and it should absolutely be one of the things that a left project is doing, is protecting marginalized groups from the attacks of the far right, then so here's the thing. If the far right successfully attack a drag time story, whatever, they can have a whole host of media produced about this and about how it was a false flag, but also it was a good thing, and also they deserved it, and what they were doing there was bad, like it was all pedophilia funded by George Soros, and also it wasn't even a right winger who did it; it was a left winger who did it anyway. They can say so much about it that benefits their narratives if they successfully do the attack. But if people show up to attack your queer event or show up to attack your synagogue, and there are just 100 anti-fascist activists there and they just fuck off, then the right wing, like you would think the right wing's victimization narrative would be so reinforced by this, so bolstered by this. It's not. They have fuck all to say about that, because telling that story is telling people
because any additional witnesses just prove that whole narrative.
Yeah, telling that story is telling the story to their followers who only believe in self-justifying power, that there is a more powerful political project than them who can make them fuck off. And this is a point that Abigail Thorne made in a video a while ago, is just like punching fascists in the face works really well because fascists believe that might is right. So when they get punched in the face, they're like, well, they are stronger than me, so they are correct. And that's the basis of their beliefs. And like the third way, so the first way is, people's material conditions and meeting them when they're in need. The second one is protecting marginalized communities from the attacks of the far right, and how that actually disables and paralyzes the feedback loop that they use to do more attacks with. And the third is just like, again, it is just more worth our while, because like, I think you will get, if your politics is all about de-radicalizing Nazis, then first you need people who were Nazis. Oh, sorry, I'll say fascists for now. People who were fascists or people who are invested enough in the fascist problem are the people who are going to care and get involved in your project. But if your project is about taking care of people while the climate crisis worsens, then that's available to everyone. And so when you mention like the international angle, right, like the evangelical far right has been trying to export Christian nationalist ideas to the UK for a really long time. But again, Piers Morgan, right? We don't have God here, so it doesn't really work. And it's kept on not working, which is why they've started funneling their money into turf groups instead. Is because they're like, well, we'll find a different angle of attack.
That is why you should keep prayer in schools.
Yeah, so we can pray away Piers Morgan.
No, so you can pray away the evangelicals. Because if you already know all about this Jesus guy and it sucks, you're not getting.
But like their project is incredibly American and is incredibly to do with America, and America and its consequences has been a disaster for the human race. But like we outside of America can build a project which speaks to absolutely everyone very easily because it's based on a global crisis that's ongoing, which is inseparable from capitalism. Yeah. Oh, and a fourth way as well that like working to build this project also like stops their project in its tracks is that they rely on anti-capitalist rhetoric all the time. They rely on telling each other and their followers how their problems are real because the Jews control capital. And it's like, well, if those same people, if you were trying to reach out to those people, but those people had already heard their problems are real because an acephalous system of capitalism and the economic mode itself is rotten to the core, and no, it has no racialized cause except maybe white people, to be frank. Then when those people try to tell that base it's the Jews or it's woke culture and its queer degeneracy or whatever other things that are utilizing anti-capitalist rhetoric but for a fascist end, those people will already have a robust anti-capitalism, and a robust anti-capitalism isn't actually vulnerable to fascist talking points. Only uninformed exposure to the material contradictions of capitalism is vulnerable to fascist talking points, which is why you get, massive Trump support in places like Detroit, because it's like they killed the unions. They worked very, very hard to kill the unions, and then they exported all of the jobs because they could get cheaper labor elsewhere. And then so people have an understanding that my grandpa's job went to China. And this guy is saying he can bring the job back. And I don't know how he's going to do that, but he says he will do it. And it's like, if instead this person was in a union, they would not be vulnerable to Trump's rhetoric. It literally would wash over them like water off a dog's back. Those are my answers to the thing. Unless they were in a police union, in which case Roblox and Minecraft.
The fact that police are allowed a separate union besides the police force is ridiculous.
Yeah, right? You're already
you have
unified
guns and things to beat us with. That's all the power you get. Thank you very much.
Andy, do you have stuff to add to that?
No. Yes.
Cool. I do want to, before we get... No, I was going to say, what the fuck else is Andy going to say? She set the whole thing up and framed it all for us. What else is there to say that Andy didn't already get out there? That's kind of, again, what we count on her for.
By the way, one of the reasons why I love coming on with Ty very much is because Ty draws a weird, fucked up path through the conversation, and then the thing that I do at the end is tell everybody what the spiral to get to the center looked like.
And I like coming on because no one else is capable of doing that for me. So. But I have a great time going on a ride. I want to end pointing back to the series you have coming out, and I really want to make sure people know where to find that when it's coming. I just want to tag a couple quick thoughts on the back end of it. First of all, if you're listening to this and you are a Christian and you take offense at anything we said, first off, we're probably not talking about you. Second off, fucking good. To the degree, one of the things that I actually was
if it don't apply, let it fly. And you're not letting it fly, so good.
digging in here, some of the rabbit holes got real dark and scary real quick. And some of it was just in seeing the continuity of things that in my memory, were troublesome but relatively innocuous in how they were likely to actually play in the real world versus how they're being leveraged today, how through that is. And but if you're listening to this and you're a Christian, obviously most of the Christians we're talking about are ones that could not make it through these 2 hours and get here. So first of all, you're already hearing that. And second of all, I would expect that your understanding of the bottom line of how you understand your faith in relation to Christ and all the commandments therein is different than what you're seeing expressed in modern day evangelicalism. And one of the more encouraging bits was going down the rabbit hole, looking up Christian nationalism, especially in the wake of January 6th. There's a lot of YouTube videos of a lot of pastors and a lot of just lay people of a lot of different denominations getting on and having conversations about a whole lot of, I don't have the answer, but this ain't it, Chief. A whole lot of going, we know this can't be what we're in, right? And to a degree, I think a lot of those people are in churches that are absolutely, if not contributing to, tangentially complicit in that larger arc. And so it's very, very good that people whose genuine faith is based in the idea that, first and foremost, you should do unto others as you'd have done to yourself, that what you've done to the least of these is a standard that you'll be judged by, that, the Good Samaritan was like not a bad dude. Like, I don't know how the fuck you fuck up that whole story, but if in those veins, I think that's the people who are looking at these threads and starting to speak up more than I ever saw in my entire coming up within the church. So there is that encouraging thread. But if you're hearing this and, fucking hit us up. I just said fuck, and I probably scared you off, but you made it this far, so get over it. Hit us up. It's a conversation we can have. These are things where there is obviously an enormous influence on America as a whole, on the Anglosphere at large, but particularly in the fucking Republican Party, that is, even most people who are Christians can agree, without getting all radical, is some of the most odious shit we're seeing. And if that is your faith and hope in eternity, you should be angrier than I am. I don't believe in this Jesus guy, and I'm insulted on his behalf. So I think that there is at least some silver linings, but understand, we keep coming back to the real goddamn threats of this stuff because it's a real goddamn threat. And there is a decreasing window to deal with it and a shortening timeline. And in my mind, I'm not saying that because I think the clouds are going to fucking part any minute now. If you think that's the case, then dear God, you should be much more afraid that your Lord and Savior is going to come back and look at what you've been allowing in his name and say, hey, we have a talk before these pearly gates open or something. I mean, I am very conscious of not wanting to, not break into the hashtag not all Christian. Because frankly, it's a lot of them. It seems the majority is pretty a safe bet there. But there are people I don't want to alienate, and I want to be clear that, this is what we're talking about. And that's where I think that the conversation we need to have down the road when we will be begging for you to come back, Sophie, because this was fucking, even if I hadn't,
I'll be very happy to come back. I had a lot of
14
fun.
times. It was so fun. It was so
she
fun.
Will
it
have
was
you
so
down
good.
On your knees, though.
And that's... I assumed that before I made the invite. In fact, I'm now demanding it, and if that doesn't happen, there are certain terms we're entering into this agreement on. But there's a lot more to chase down, and I'm so excited for the series y'all are doing. I had to get that out because I feel I err towards fuck these fucking Christians, these goddamn Pharisees. Go pray loudly on a street corner and tear your and that's not the entirety of what I, feel or experience and who I know.
It's born out of the frustration, yeah.
And that doesn't apply to you, then that's because I'm not fucking talking about you. But get your boys in line, please, because there's only so much I, a godless heathen, can say to them.
And remember, there is somebody in everybody's life who if you turn to that person and you say, shut the fuck up, they will shut the fuck up. And you don't know if you're that person until you've tried.
However, if you are their mother, it's probably
it's definitely if you're their mother.
Yeah.
I said fuck in front of my mom once and I got fucking backhanded, so I don't test that theory. But of all people, if my mom told me to shut the fuck up, I'd be like, Continue. Let's hear what you have to say. It's probably very silly, but go ahead. Sorry. Tell us about what you have coming out next, and then the series, the series coming out, and we'll end there because I want that to be the last note. And what people are looking forward to kind of follow this conversation in more structured.
So if you follow me on YouTube at Sophie from Mars, that's where I publish my silly little thoughts fueled by estrogen. And next I'm putting out a video about Ye West and the fascists who love him. It's called Ye West and the fascists who love him. Like I said, it may well be out by the time that this podcast is out. If not, just hang tight like a couple days. It's imminent. It's about to drop. It's the fastest I've put together a very long video before, because I interviewed a couple of friends. I interviewed a friend who is a black YouTuber and a friend who's a Jewish YouTuber because I wanted their perspectives to be able to put some clips from our interview in, and I did that before I wrote the script. But then in writing the script, it was like, once I write down everything that's happened, and then I give the proper context to the people, like, you shouldn't mention Nick Fuentes without saying he's a Holocaust denier who advocates for the worst possible kind of nightmare fascist government imaginable. Right, once you write those kinds of contextualizing statements, you already have 10 pages and you haven't started analyzing what has happened yet. So it's going to be like quite a long video, but it's come together very quickly. It'll be out soon. And that's on my channel. So that's number one. Number two is The Last Capitalist We Redacted will be the one who sells us Minecraft. And number three was Andy and I are writing an essay currently called Apocalypse Preachers, which will be out probably in the back half of next year, of 2023, that is. And it's about we're
going deep.
People of all sorts who are, well, not really of all sorts, but people who are creating fake realities that make people organize politically and make real effective political change in the world, but for the worst possible things, when, and often they hinge around an apocalypse narrative about how the queers are going to destroy the world, or whatever, but there is an apocalypse they could be organizing to politically fight. So why don't they do that? That was kind of the starting point of it, and now we've done all this research into Christian identity, and I want to take my brain out and just pour bleach all over it. But it's going to look at the history of apocalypse preachers who people can kind of identify more clearly, like Charles Manson or whatever, and then our current day apocalypse preachers like Donald Trump, Alex Jones, Jim Baker, the TERF movement, Jordan Peterson, and kind of tie together what it is that they are all doing.
Jordan Peterson, the apocalypse preacher, is the best summation of both that man and the genre that I've ever heard.
If this is your first time hearing of Sophie as a person, you can find Sophie at Patreon.
That's true. That is the one that
where you can donate $2 or more than $2 to see
very true
from Sophie
from
Mars.
We have a fun to the Patreon is because we can point to, be like, well, there's Andy's Patreon, and there's Sophie's Patreon, and there's all these Patreons that we're basically here to plug secondarily on their behalf. So go do it.
We do this for fun and not for profit. We do this for my profit and guests. Indeed. I think that was it.
Go support the folks who are willing to dive into this. Because do you want to do it? Do you want to research this? I assure you, you do not. Sophie, thank you so much for your time. You were so generous that we broke 2 hours and we could have gone 20 more. Share this podcast. Happy fucking emojis.
Follow it.
And I would love to come on again. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm sure we would have very productive conversations. Next time I'll tell you about Only the Good Die Young, Billy Joel's explicit rejection of Catholicism and its effects on working class neighborhoods in the ways that it represses people. Listener, there are 2 more hours that you won't hear where I talk to these two about Billy Joel right now. Bye for now.
Super secret Patreon. You donate $50 a month to Sophie, and she will link you the super secret Patreon. By that I mean we will record that episode post-hoc.
I liked it.